Welcome to our webinar on the Huff Family Fund. As mentioned, we might get a ding just whenever I have to admit one.
And interestingly enough, Jillian, I think you're the only one that can hear the ding, just so you know.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just driving you crazy,
So
nobody
it's
else.
just for me. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the webinar on the Huff Family Fund, hosted by the County Foundation. My name is Jane Armstrong, and I am the Grants and Communications Administrator for the Foundation. Dawn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Good morning, everybody. My name's Dominique Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the County Foundation. Happy to see you all here, many familiar faces and a couple that I haven't met, I think, either in person or virtually yet. So a big hello to everybody. Excited that you could join us to talk about the Huff Family Fund. As Jillian will mention, she's going to go throughout the presentation. It's a very impactful fund from a very generous family in our community that we're very lucky to have. And at the end of the day, that's what community foundations are all about, harnessing the power of philanthropy and driving it towards local community action and impact that is delivered by organizations like yourself. So very happy to be here. And Jillian, I'll turn it back over to you. I'm just going to be here in case there's any questions that I can answer, or also I just like watching Jillian work. She's great. She knows her stuff. She'll answer your questions to her best ability. And I always look forward to an interesting zinger of a question too from our organizations. Take it away.
Okay, what an introduction. So welcome everyone. So as mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Huff Family Fund today. So today will be a bit of a sort of general overview of the program, as well as what to expect as a part of the application process, and to just review any of the changes from last year for anyone who has applied previously. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, just so everyone's aware. But if you have specific questions about the application process, about your particular application, then please feel free to reach out to me, and we can set up kind of a meeting to discuss things a little more in depth. I'm actually just going to pop my email into the chat so that you guys have got it. Today's webinar is also being recorded. This is going to live on our website just for anyone who was unable to attend live. Also just handy in case there are any things that you guys want to reference back to later. And let's jump in. So I'm just going to move our little window over here. For our agenda today, we're going to start with a land acknowledgement. We'll then go over what is the Huff Family Fund, the eligibility, so who is able to apply and for what types of projects, application overview, so what is included in the application, what you need to provide. We'll go over tips for writing a strong grant application. We'll also go over the adjudication process as well as the criteria and the timelines for everything. And like I said, we'll do a Q&A at the end. So you might want to hold off on putting your questions in the chat till the end, just because we might cover something that we'll get to later in the presentation. Okay. So starting with, we would love to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. These peoples agreed to mutual sharing obligations and responsibilities as stewards of the land and water. We recognize that these are now our shared obligations, working in partnership with our current neighbors, the Mohawk Bay of Quinte peoples. Miigwech, Niawe, thank you for letting us gather here today. So what is the Huff Family Fund? So the Huff Family Fund was established in 2017. So it's going on its 6th year. And to kind of summarize, it is a commitment to the future of Prince Edward County. So it supports programs with a focus in addiction and mental health, animal welfare, arts and culture, health and human services, housing issues, and vital signs priority areas. So that includes education and learning, food security, and transportation. So for anyone who is unfamiliar, Vital Signs is a national program that the County Foundation participates in. And there's kind of two sides to Vital Signs, one being our online data bank. This is a free resource that anyone can access with information about data related to Prince Edward County and what the community needs are. So that's available through our website, and Don will also put that information in the chat for you guys. And then on the other side of Vital Signs, we have our annual reports. We actually have a new interim report coming out on October 4th. We're hosting a launch at the Regent Theatre in Picton. And that is free to attend, and you can RSVP through our website. It's going to be focused on inclusion and belonging this year, titled Building Bridges of Inclusion. So anyone is free to attend those. Those reports are also available online, and you can find that through the Vital Signs section of our website. So the Huff Family Fund is a matching fund. So what does that mean? So if you put in an application for $5,000, and that's your request to the Huff Family Fund, it needs to be matched with either $5,000 in other funding or matched with volunteer hours. So you might be wondering, what does that actually look like? So if your overall project is $10,000, your request to the Huff Family Fund is for $5,000. And you can show $5,000 in matching funds or volunteer hours. Now, one of the questions you may have is, how do we show volunteer hours? So what we're looking for is a quantifiable amount. So how you determine that is if you were to pay someone to do that job in that volunteer role, and kind of looking at sort of what the industry average is, what would that amount be? So for example, if someone is getting paid $25 an hour and they're working for 100 hours volunteering, then that amount would average out to $2,500. So that's how you would get that amount. And another question you may have is, okay, well, if I have $2,500 in volunteer hours, can I also have both matching funds as well as volunteer hours? And yes, you can. So what that would look like is, if you have a $5,000 request from the Huff Family Fund, you might have $2,500 in volunteer hours and $2,500 in other funding. And so usually that's pretty desirable from an adjudication standpoint, because in that case, you are showing us that you have sort of the person power behind the scenes of people who are going to run the program, as well as additional funding going towards the project. So that can be a really good thing to show. And then lastly, these matching funds and volunteer hours must be verified and included in your application. So you need to show us, like, you can't just say, yes, we've got the matching funds, but who is it? And, you know, if we went up to them and asked them on the street, hey, are you funding this project? Would they know about it and be aware? So that's what we're looking for there. So updates to the grants program. So there's a couple changes from last year that we wanted to highlight for you guys. So the funding has increased to $250,000. That's up from $125,000 last year. So the amount of available funding has doubled, which is really, really great. That's because the Huffs recognize the growing kind of need within the community. It's very generous of them to increase that amount. You'll also see that individual grants, you can now apply for up to $30,000. That's up from $20,000 last year. And now I think one of the most exciting changes for this year is that you can now apply for multi-year funding for up to $30,000 over 3 years. So that would be $10,000 per year. This is something we advocated for because what we hear from a lot of different organizations is there may be a program that they're specifically looking at kind of expanding over the next 3 years. And this would provide a little more wiggle room for long-term planning. One of the things to be aware of when applying for multi-year funding is that even though you would only receive $10,000 for this year, the adjudication process, you would be approved for the full 30. So it's as though you're asking for that full 30 amount for this year. You would be approved for that amount. And then over the next 3 years, you'd receive those disbursements. So you would be unable to apply to the Huff Family Fund until that original grant has been dispersed over the 3 years. And one of the things to also be aware of is that you would have to provide an annual report before a subsequent year of funding is advanced. So what that would look like is it would just be a simple report, a check-in that provides a bit of like accountability, just making sure that one, the project is going ahead still, that there haven't been any kind of unforeseen speed bumps, just as a bit of a check-in point to make sure that everything is going well with the project and to keep us in the loop about how things are going. Okay, eligibility. So who is eligible to apply? So you must be a qualified donee to apply, as defined by the Income Tax Act. You could also be working in partnership with a qualified donee under which funds will flow and the project will be managed. So qualified donees include registered charities, municipalities, schools, and universities. And most importantly, the project and organization must support the citizens of Prince Edward County. One of the questions you might have is, say, you might be a charity in Belleville or Quinte that has programs in Prince Edward County, and you would be able to apply for those projects. But the main takeaway point is that it must benefit the citizens of Prince Edward County. So the benefit has to be here. Okay. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water just before I get to this very long list. Okay, so eligible projects. So what are the eligible projects? Things that would qualify include an expansion of service or creation of new programming, or a project that allows organizations to do more for their target group. So looking at sort of capacity building. Inputs to allow projects to serve. So we provided some examples, one being animal food to improve animal welfare. That would be like if you're a animal shelter, or food to support cooking classes for a vulnerable sector. So you're usually looking at providing specific materials in order for a project to go ahead. Projects that educate and support sectors of the community in need. Evaluation of an existing project or organization to position better further funding possibilities. Small capital projects, so facility improvements that build organizational capacity to better serve. So an example of that would be maybe if you have a building and you're looking at building a ramp so that more people can access your building. And then lastly, ongoing operational costs. And I can't see ongoing operational costs in unique or certain circumstances. So just to clarify kind of what that means, operational costs are usually tied into maybe a grant application, but in this case, we're looking at very specific situations, sort of case by case, and you are looking at something that is an unforeseen cost. So, the thing that comes to mind obviously is the pandemic, which, is fresh in our minds and also still very much relevant to today. So maybe something occurred that you just couldn't have predicted that's affected your revenues. And so in that case, those types of projects or costs you could apply for, but it's very specific circumstances. And then application overview. So this is everything that you'll need to include as part of your application to the Huff Family Fund. So details of qualified donee, so that's including like either your own or the information related to the partner that you're working with who is a qualified donee. Mailing address. We added that accuracy is very important here because this is where the money is going to be sent, and we want that money to get to you. So it's important that everything is correct here. Project description. This is where you actually get to go in depth about kind of what you're applying for, what the project's going to look like, what's your vision, areas of interest. So these are check boxes. So that can be arts and culture or animal welfare or education. So under one of those specific areas and what's kind of related. How will the Huff Family Fund grant help your project? This is a question where you should probably try to be as specific as possible. One of the things we'd want to avoid is if you're submitting a grant application and you're like, oh, well, we received a grant and it's going to help us because now we can do the project. And that's going to be true of most of the organizations applying. So the more specific can be, the better. So one way to look at it would be, we're going to use this grant to pay for materials or tools and the number of them you'll purchase. And that will allow us to service X number of individuals as a part of this project. So the more information that you can provide, the stronger your case will be. Next up, we have community need. So how does your project fulfill a community need? And we've added here helpful to have stats and data. So this is one of the things that you could look into using vital signs information for. You're also welcome to include your own kind of research that's kind of been verified. What we want to avoid is, all of us in the community might have heard from other individuals or people like through the grapevine, oh, well, this would be really great and we want this program. And we're obviously all very passionate about our own work and our own area of interest, but this just provides a little more background and detail into kind of what's happening in the data of Prince Edward County and community need. So it just kind of gives your application a bit more even validity. Schedule and timelines. So this is pretty straightforward. When is your project going to begin? When is it going to end? Are you going to host several sessions over a couple months? Are you looking at running a week-long program? What does that look like? And then continued objectives. What is the objective of the project? What is the impact going to be? What are your goals that you want to achieve? That kind of information. Huff Fund recognition. So how will you recognize the Huff Family Fund if you receive a grant? This is going to look different organization to organization. You might think about including the Huff Fund logo on a website page for the program that they're sponsoring. You could include them on a poster. If it's a capital project of some kind, maybe you're including a plaque, or maybe there's an event or a newspaper ad, but just including kind of a variety of different information. Yeah, I think that's just, you can get creative with that one. And then budget, obviously very important, but it can be very simple and straightforward. Excel is totally fine. And just including obviously the information about the matching funds, that's probably the most important aspect to include in your budget, which is, do you have those matching fund dollars? Financial statements, this can be unaudited, that's totally fine, just looking at your most recent financial statements. So we can have an overall look at your organization. And then lastly, final reports. Now, this is only applicable if you have been a successful recipient of a grant from the Huff Family Fund previously, which is, have you submitted your final report? So we need to receive your final report before you can apply for additional funding through the Huff Family Fund. That's just to do a follow-up, obviously, on any previous funding that you've received. We're happy to receive that even at the same time that you submit the application, but we do need to have that before your application will be eligible. Okay, let's go into tips for grant writing. So in this case, this is just kind of general information, general best practice tips for writing grants. Like I said, if you have kind of specific questions about your own application, I'm happy to kind of answer questions about that or set up a meeting to chat. So this is just kind of a general overview. So clarity, does your application clearly state who you are, what your project is, and how it relates to the focus of the Huff Family Fund? When we talk about clarity, it's important to say that, an adjudication committee may not be as familiar with your organization or its activities, what type of programming you do. So providing some kind of general information for someone who is unfamiliar with you and being as clear as possible. And I also caution against overwhelming adjudication committees with information as well. So trying to kind of strike a balance in that, we want to hear about your organization and all the wonderful things you guys do, but just making clear that, this is a very project-based application. And so not to lose sight of kind of the main reason that you're applying. And so it doesn't get lost in all the information included. Realistic requests, so framing your application around funds that you need for the project and matching funds and volunteer hours rather than just applying for the max and see where you get. So I think we've all seen those posters where it's like, like shoot for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll land amongst the stars. But in this case, it's not the best strategy. The more specific you can get with your budget and the information, the better. My advice is always you want to make the adjudication committee's job as difficult as possible. And the way you do that is by being really specific with the funds that you're applying for and where that information is, where those funds are being directed. So if you're buying X amount of tools, or that this is going to go towards this many hours of paying, someone running the program, or just trying to get really specific with those numbers, because then it's much harder than to envision going forward with the project without those things, because you've been very clear. Relevance, make sure your application relates back to the focus of the fund. So that kind of goes back to, is this focused on a benefit to Prince Edward County? Is this focused on one of the areas of interest of the fund? Does it kind of serve the purpose of what the Huff Family Fund is trying to achieve and what they're interested in funding? And then adjudication and criteria. So this is something we wanted to include in the presentation for this year. As we all know, if we've worked in nonprofits, sometimes you write grant applications and you send them off, and then you think to yourself, wow, I have no idea how I was evaluated, who is evaluating me. There's like a bit of mystery between the grant being submitted to then how it is evaluated and getting that response. So we wanted to provide a bit of background on kind of what that looks like. So at the County Foundation and with the Huff Family Fund, we assemble an adjudication committee. Some of the things that we look at when we're putting together an adjudication committee is getting a variety of different, community-minded individuals with a variety of different backgrounds. That could be professionally, that could be based off of their kind of own areas of interest about what they're really passionate about. So you could have one adjudication committee member who's really, really passionate about the arts, and then there could be another adjudication committee member who feels very strongly about programs for seniors or for healthcare. But we just try to strike a balance between kind of all those different areas, as well as where they are in the county. It wouldn't be a really great adjudication committee if it was all really Picton-centric or Wellington-centric, and all the adjudication committee members were a part of that one area. What we want to do is kind of have a well-spread adjudication committee. And one of the things that happens after we have selected that committee, so that they are, involved in a variety of different sectors, is that they receive then the criteria in which the applications will be evaluated. And so we're looking at kind of 4 key areas in which each application will be evaluated. And that starts with alignment. So does this application meet the objectives of the Huff Family Fund? Does this application benefit Prince Edward County? So how does it align to the goals of the Huff Family Fund? Community benefit. Does this project fill a need in the community? Is this a new initiative or an expanded initiative? Is this project backed up with evidence? And so that could be vital signs or other sources. Financial, is the ask reasonable? Do they have much matching funds and volunteer hours? Organizational capacity, so can you deliver the project as outlined? Does it serve cross sections of the county? Is the timeline reasonable? Or are you trying to build a whole building in a month? Like, those are the types of questions that we would ask them to go over. And every application is always evaluated first based off of its own merits. So we look at them all individually. And then they are then measured against merit against other applications. And so what does that mean? So sometimes in a grants program, we are oversubscribed, which basically means that we have more requests for funding than funding available. And this is when we get a little bit more into the weeds. So merit against other applications, things that we would look at is, have we dispersed funding across different sectors, or is it really focused on a specific area? And we should maybe look at dispersing it further. Has funding been dispersed across the county, or is it, again, very Picton-centric? We might ask, is this project serving an underrepresented group in the county? Is the project inclusive? Is it accessible? Just asking those types of questions. And then sometimes it also comes down to, do we want to fully fund one project, or would we like to split funding across multiple projects because we like them all and they're all eligible? And this is when it gets a bit difficult. And so that's why we want to have a variety of different perspectives, because that's what keeps the adjudication process fair. And then once they have kind of, the adjudication committee has made a decision that they're happy with, or at least, feel comfortable with, those recommendations then go to the Huffs, and then they go to our board for approvals. And then that's when we announce, the good news and the not so good news sometimes. Okay, so going over timelines, applications are due Friday, October 20th at noon. No late submissions will be accepted. This is just in fairness to anyone who has submitted their application on time. It also delays things on the back end, because then, we're sending applications late to adjudicators or pushing timelines back, and that's just going to impact the other applications negatively, because we want to get back to people as quickly as possible. Applications can be submitted online through our website or email to info@thecountyfoundation.ca. You can also drop off paper copies to our office at 35 Bridge Street, Suite 107 in Picton, or you can also mail them to us. I would maybe recommend that, even just because our office can be a little bit tricky to find sometimes. Applicants will be notified of the outcome of their application in November 2023, with funding to follow to approved applicants in December 2023. This is just a bit of information, which is any declined applicants will have the opportunity opportunity to discuss why they were declined and will receive advice on applying for funding moving forward. So we understand, and I personally, have done grant applications, and I know how much work goes into them on the back end, pulling together all the information and stats, and going over multiple team members for edits. So we always want to be conscious that you've put in a lot of time into these applications, and so even if you are declined, we will include information about kind of why that decision was made. And we're also happy to set up meetings if you have further questions. Okay, and that's it. We did it. So we're at the Q&A now. So if you have any questions, kind of general questions about the Huff Family Fund, then let's have them. You can just put them in the chat and we can discuss. I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see you guys.
Or you can put up your hand if that's easier too. That works.
Sure. So who wants to start? Was my presentation so good that you guys have no questions?
Must have been.
Maybe.
It was really good. Thank you.
Sandra.
I'm here on behalf of Reaching for Rainbows. Nice to see everyone. Is there a template for us to fill out, or should we just, is it sort of free form?
So there is a template, the application form you can find on our website. So if you go to thecountyfoundation.ca, you'll see a section for grants and open grants, and the Huff Family Fund will be underneath there. And there's a section titled How to Apply. And so that's where you will find the online application form and the PDF printable version if that's your preference. But I will warn with the PDF printable version that the sections are pretty small for writing. So you can always just take those questions and then write out your answers. It just, as long as it's within the word limit, that's what matters.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No worries.
Andrea, I just popped that link into the chat just so that you know, so you can find the application form.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Joanne, you had a question?
No, I'm sorry. I meant to say that. Great presentation. Thumbs up. Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
We have another Joanne.
Enthusiasm. Oh.
Hi, I'm Joanne from Prince Edward Point Bird Observatory. And I just wanted to say, yes, it was a really good presentation and thank you for that. I did have a question about the funding. Can grant portion be, so if we got funding from another source and the funding from the Huff Foundation, will we be 100% funding, or does there have to be contribution from the applicant, some sort of financial inclusion?
So you're
Or can
referring
it just be 100% funded?
You're referring to the matching component, Joanne?
Sorry. Yeah.
So it does not have to be from the organization itself. So if your matching component is, let's say, a donation from an individual, or if it's another grant program, that is fine. The only thing that I would caution or ask about this other grant, is it funds that you've already received, or is it money that you're applying for?
Yeah, it's just a question in general. I don't know, how much do we have to be vested ourselves as an organization? Was there, was that something that was brought into consideration?
Yeah, it's a good question. And sometimes you do see that in either debt or granting applications, where adjudicators want to see, what's your skin in the game? How invested are you? For this particular one, when it comes to matching, there's a lot of flexibility here, because we know that our organizations deal with not only a lot of challenges, but we don't have, a lot of our orgs don't have that sustainable ministry funding or something year over year. So you're constantly looking for fundraisers or grants or donations and volunteer contributions. So the Huffs wanted to make sure that there was that flexibility and not put a number on that. So just to summarize, what I would say about that particular scenario, absolutely you can use another grant application. If it is a grant that you haven't received, but you're applying for it, it's not going to look as strong, because the question to the adjudicators is going to be, okay, what happens if they don't receive that grant funding, or they don't receive the funding in full? How are they going to do the match? But if it's grant funding that you've already received and it's something that's going to be applied for the project that you're working on, that can absolutely be utilized. If you are putting organizational money in, that is another way to show a matching contribution. That also looks good. And as Jillian mentioned, volunteer time is also considered. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
No problem.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Guessing that's a no. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. As mentioned, the webinar is being recorded, and so we will post this on our website in case you want to reference back. But you got my email, and you can always reach out if you have any additional questions that you think of later. But thank you so much. Okay. Toodles.
Have a good day. Bye now.